We judge the world through the lens of our own experience, and neurotypicals don't know what it's like to have an executive function impairment. That leads to cognitive bias. Tangibility is something that we prefer. We dismiss the abstract. That's tangibility bias. And it's convenient for society if we do it their way. They like things systematized. Why? Because it's less work for them. That's what I call systemic bias. Those three bias have people, in my opinion, paying attention to the wrong thing because behavior is tangible. So the way we go about helping people with ADHD is we try to train them to conform with the way society does it. And what I really would like people to recognize is it's an executive function impairment. There's an impairment. It's less efficient. My eyesight is impaired. I use glasses as an accommodation to help mitigate that impairment. And all too often, we're judging behavior and comparing people with ADHD to neurotypicals, discounting the fact that there's an impairment. And we'll talk a little bit about today about what I'm trying to do to mitigate that impairment. But often, again, people are looking with people with ADHD as if there's not an impairment there with expectations that they're going to perform with a neurotypical. And quite frankly, what you guys are about is kindness. And this speaks to this. Let's be kind and acknowledge there's an impairment, and let's give them accommodations that provide relief as opposed to more time to suffer. And that's the current mindset. And again, embedded in what you guys do are trying to advocate for people with ADHD, but being kind to them is to recognize this is a bit more challenging. And much of what you guys are doing are providing what I call adaptive accommodations for these kids to be able to interact as a means to mitigate the impairment. So much of what you're doing for kids on the fringe is actually aligned with what we'll talk about today. And I really wish more people looked at ADHD as an impairment.
Hello, I'm Tony.
And I'm Casey.
And welcome to Anthony's Way, The Road to Kindness, and our YouTube and podcast channel, The Way Forward, A Kindness Mission. We want to welcome especially those joining us for the first time. It is great to have you with us. We created Anthony's Way, The Road to Kindness in memory of our dear son, Anthony, with one mission in mind: to help kids with ADHD thrive. And the beautiful part about that is to date, we have helped over 60 families get the help and care that they needed for their child. And we are directly sponsoring children and their families. So we're excited about that. January is a new year and a new beginning. Another semester at school for kids, new challenges, all the things that could make those with ADHD retreat. However, this month, we want to raise awareness to what motivates you, manage your emotions, and bring you the best of the best in terms of ADHD and the leaders in the ADHD space. And today we have one of the best. Mr. Jeff Copper is joining us. Hey, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being with us.
So Casey's going to give a brief introduction, and then we'll go in. Go ahead, please.
Okay. So Jeff Copper is a leading voice in the ADHD arena. He is an ADHD coach, founder of Dig Coaching Practice, and host of the top-rated Attention Talk Radio and Attention Talk Video. He helps adults, professionals, and creatives with ADHD navigate overwhelm, impulsivity, and executive function challenges through his innovative cognitive ergonomics from the inside out approach and attention scope tool. A new motivational theory to restore equilibrium that was derived on Dr. Russell Barkley's model. Jeff has received many recognitions over the years. He is the recipient of the 2022 ADHD Coaches Organization Professional Excellence Award, and he helped us launch Anthony's Way, The Road to Kindness, on his podcast way back in October of 2023. He is a wonderful friend and supporter of our efforts and to help kids with ADHD. So get comfortable and let's jump into this important conversation with Jeff.
Jeff, welcome.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. It's hard to believe it's been 2 years since we did that original interview with you guys. It was a lot of fun. You guys come a long way.
We have. We've been working hard, and you know that. So we appreciate your support, my friend.
Working hard and help from people like you to help us get our word out there.
So Jeff, just so everybody understands your story a little bit, can you fill people in on your personal journey with ADHD and how it led you to the work you're doing today?
So I was actually diagnosed with dyslexia at age 9 and struggled most of my life I got through high school without even doing college prep. I had a hard enough time with English, much less Spanish or chemistry. But I was fortunate to be a scholarship athlete and went to college and swam internationally for a couple of years. And when I got to school, all the tutors that were forced upon me were kind of gone. I had to figure it out on my own. And I kind of got creative at that point in time. I quit listening to what experts said and really just tried to pay attention to what worked for me. And I was able to get my way through school. I remember there was a research paper I did one time, not by going to the library, but by interviewing subject matter experts, which is legal. And so that's kind of an impetus of how I started Attention Talk Radio. But anyway, later on in life, I got diagnosed with ADHD. And I've found that like there's a lot of people that are with challenges that are smart. It's just that the differences in their brain and so sometimes the impairments actually get in the way. And a lot of times, if you can innovate and be creative, you can find ways to be productive. And really, motivation is very much tied to effort, among other things. And so we'll be talking about that later today. But my journey has took me into various things in my life. But I came to ADHD coaching back in 2007 and really found a home for myself and have enjoyed it ever since.
Yeah. It was so much fun kicking off our charity with you, and you have such a wonderful way of bringing things together.
You do.
And telling a story, and that's what we love about you. So, now ADHD is often misunderstood. So what do you wish parents, educators, and even clinicians, what do you wish they understood better about ADHD?
I wish that they understood that ADHD is an executive functioning impairment. And I'm speaking to you from Dr. Russell Barkley's model. There's lots of models out there. I won't go into the details. I prefer his substantially over others. But in short, executive functions are a collection of mind tools that you use to solve problems. We had done a podcast with you back in October that spoke a little bit more specifically to this. And problems, they're mind tools that you use to solve problems. Problems are multifaceted and ambiguous, like planning, managing time, making decisions, and problem solving. And what people, because executive functions are intangible, they tend to focus on people's behavior. And the way I really like to describe this is there's this cognitive bias because we judge the world through the lens of our own experience, and neurotypicals don't know what it's like to have an executive function impairment. That leads to cognitive bias. Tangibility is something that we prefer. We dismiss the abstract. That's tangibility bias. And it's convenient for society if we do it their way. They like things systematized. Why? Because it's less work for them. That's what I call systemic bias. Those three bias have people, in my opinion, paying attention to the wrong thing because behavior is tangible. So the way we go about helping people with ADHD is we try to train them to conform with the way society does it. And what I really would like people to recognize is it's an executive function impairment. There's an impairment. It's less efficient. My eyesight is impaired. I use glasses as an accommodation to help mitigate that impairment. And all too often, we're judging behavior and comparing people with ADHD to neurotypicals, discounting the fact that there's an impairment. And we'll talk a little bit about today about what I'm trying to do to mitigate that impairment. But often, again, people are looking at people with ADHD as if there's not an impairment there with expectations that they're going to perform with a neurotypical. And quite frankly, what you guys are about is kindness. And this speaks to this. Let's be kind and acknowledge there's an impairment, and let's give them accommodations that provide relief as opposed to more time to suffer. And that's the current mindset. And again, embedded in what you guys do, are trying to advocate for people with ADHD, but being kind to them is to recognize this is a bit more challenging. And much of what you guys are doing are providing what I call adaptive accommodations for these kids to be able to interact as a means to mitigate the impairment. So much of what you're doing for kids on the fringe is actually aligned with what we'll talk about today. And I really wish more people looked at ADHD as an impairment. There's a lot of people out there that are calling it a gift or different brain wiring. And I appreciate hope. And individuals are gifted. ADHD is not something I think that you'd wrap up in a present and give to somebody for their birthday. And the thing about it is if you can help people mitigate the impairment, their individual natural gifts can blossom. And so I really want to emphasize that, because what you guys are doing so much is giving the resources to these kids that are challenged to mitigate that so that their natural talents can blossom. And really just want to encourage that.
I love the way you put that. That was excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. So what led you to develop cognitive ergonomics from the inside out, and then your new motivational theory, Jeff?
So this is going to be kind of intellectual heady, so just bear with me. In order to, well, let me back up. Before the 1800s, we saw lightning, and you might have gotten shocked by certain things, but we didn't really understand what the heck was going on, because at the time we didn't understand what electricity was. Through a series of individuals and events in the early 1800s, current was defined. So once we defined current, okay, that's kind of cool. But along came a guy named John Maxwell who connected electricity and magnetism. And when he did that, he derived a set of equations called Maxwell's equations that explained how electricity would behave. So in simple terms, we had to define what to pay attention to, that being current. Then we had to have a mechanism, a lens, if you will, to see it. Now, we normally think of a lens as like a telescope or a microscope, but when you think about a CAT scan, MRI, mathematics, or these equations are really a means to see it. So when you have these two things, you know what is you've defined and you have a means to see it, you can problem solve like an engineer. So we have a whole field of electrical engineering. What I did is I saw Dr. Barkley talk about executive functions and define them back in 2010 and 2011 with specificity. At the time, I think he was saying there's like 34, 35 different definitions out there. And it really was, as he said, a dog's breakfast, anything goes. Wow. So he set out to define them very specifically. And when I heard those, I'm like, this is absolutely brilliant, because by defining them, we can determine what is and is not an executive function. And so as I played around with that over a period of time, I developed a collection of simulated experiences that I would put people in so that they could bring tangibility, what Dr. Barkley defined. So collectively, those experiences are what I called attention scope, the play off of attention as scope. So like I could have you make a meal, clean a meal up, and you make a meal, eat a meal, and clean a meal, use up and clean it using your less dominant hand. And you might say, oh, it's frustrated and that was awkward. But if you paid attention to it, you'd have to be self-aware every moment of that exercise. That's an executive function. If you do it, you'd realize it takes a lot of energy to be self-aware and on guard. You probably have to downregulate your emotions because you got frustrated. That's an executive function. Restrain your urge to use your dominant hand. That's self-restraint. Visual imagery. You might have to look at how you would hold a knife in your dominant hand in order to figure out how to hold it in your non-dominant hand. If you go through that simulation, those, I'm bringing tangibility to what he defined. And so just like electricity, you have current, Dr. Barkley's definition, you have Maxwell's equation, you have tension scope. So now for the first time, we can go about helping those with ADHD in a more engineering type approach by identifying root cause and solving for the problem. So that's something I had developed over a period of time and work with my clients. In fact, it's cut my coaching time probably in half because of the efficiency associated with it. And it's something that I'm rolling out. You'll note that it's not called ADHD ergonomics because this applies to anybody with an executive function impairment, not just ADHD. So it could be dyslexia and some other things. It wouldn't work for schizophrenia, but that's what the model was there and derived on. And it's produced a lot of exciting stuff. In fact, one of them is what we call our intangible accommodation axiom. Again, we talked about that last October, and I encourage people, if you're listening to this, go back and listen to that for detail on it. But it's been a very exciting new intervention for people with ADHD.
That's so cool. Yeah, the way you explain that, that's awesome. I mean, hopefully we'll include last October's link in there for the summit. So that was awesome. So tell us about this motivational theory that you came up with. How does it translate and move? How does it move people in the
Absolutely. So motivation is one of those topics in and of itself is exceptionally emotional. there's a lot of people looking at motivation, and there's a lot of what I call subjective observations. And I often have parents or other people call me up and say, my spouse is unmotivated or my kid's unmotivated. And I'm like, listen, that's not an objective observation, because everything you've done in your entire life, you did it at that time because you were motivated to do it. Right. And everything you haven't done, you didn't do it because when you could have done it, you were actually motivated to do something else. So saying somebody's not motivated is not a factual observation. Mm-hmm. And so, but there's a lot of emotions, like motivation is what you should do. Well, it's not what you should do, it's what you actually do. And I argue is that saying that a kid's not motivated is just shaming them. It's not solving for the underlying problem. All you're doing is making them feel bad. It's actually kind of a disservice. Absolutely. And most people are doing that because they don't really know what to do. They're having an emotional reaction to it. So by delving into this, I started studying it under our model, and Dr. Barkley talks about the ADHD brain as a two-level system. You have your automatic brain, which is kind of the primitive brain down near the brainstem. It's basically the dopamine brain, the fight, flight, or freeze brain. That brain is very important for survival, and it manifests every day in your urges. So like if you switch positions at night, in the middle of the night, you're doing it to escape discomfort. You have the urge to get comfortable. You have an urge to pee, urge to drink a water, urge to escape doing anything that's difficult. It really drives a lot of stuff. And it's very emotionally driven because it's based off feeling good. Well, in looking at Dr. Barkley's model, he talks about the executive functioning brain being effortful. And it's got to take energy to override the automatic brain. And I was pondering at one point in time motivation, saying, what would it look like as a two-level system and then a 2-4 system? So I reached out to Dr. Barkley and I said, has anybody ever looked at it like this? And he said, well, to my knowledge, they haven't, nor have I, but it's a logical conclusion based off of my model. So I've developed it. And when you think about it, you have your primitive brain, whose motivation is based off of your urges, your primitive urges to escape discomfort or to seek pleasure. Okay. It's the reason we procreate. It's the reason we forage food. You have your executive function brain that's motivated by emotion too, but it's the emotion to achieve. Okay. It's to achieve. Now, the urges feel good. Executive function motivation is a little bit different. The way I like to describe it, in college, I was a competitive swimmer, and I would go to the pool and the water temperature is 79 degrees. Now in Indiana, when you're walking outside and it's 20 degrees to get to the pool and you walk inside and you're standing over water's edge, you got to like kind of talk yourself into dive in the water because it's going to be uncomfortable for a little bit of time. And I describe this because literally I've gone 30 minutes before, gotten to water's edge, looked down at the pool and turned around and went home. And the point really is, there's a level of discomfort that you have to endure in order to achieve what you want to achieve. So with that being said, we have two forces that are competing for dominance. When we take a look at these two forces that are competing for dominance, it changes the way we look at things. So now let's introduce the concept of an impairment. Executive functions are what we use in order to solve problems and to achieve goals. So let's say that your executive functioning brain is impaired by 50%. What this would mean is 1 unit of motivation for a neurotypical would produce 1 unit of output. But for a person with ADHD, 1 unit of motivation would only produce a half an output. Wow. Yeah. What does that say? That means you got to invest another unit of motivation to make up for that difference. So it'd take twice the motivation in this simple example. That extra effort is an emotional cost that swings the pendulum over to the primitive side. So people with ADHD will tend to act on urges. So let's make this more tangible. Imagine the pool temperature is like 79 degrees for a neurotypical, but for me, it's 59. All right. It's more uncomfortable for me. I need more motivation in order to dive in the water. And quite frankly, back when I swam, I had like 4.5% body fat. I'm not getting into water that's less than 76 degrees, period. Like it's not. And so when we begin to look at people with ADHD like that, it changes the way we see them because people judge them as unmotivated. And I would argue, oh, no, it takes them a lot more effort to produce the same output when it comes to executive functions. They're trying really, really, really hard, but all too often we're just sitting there judging them. So I want to pause because that's a lot of information to see if you have any questions so far.
Yeah, I'll tell you. No, I understand. I think I hope everybody understands that. That is so cool because let's talk about our son for a minute, Anthony. Okay. Anthony loved martial arts. Okay. However, there were many mornings when we leave the house without him because he didn't want to get up to come on Saturday. So Gabrielle and I, we head off to the gym and to get trained. And Casey would call us and say, "Hey, Anthony wants to come now. Come back and get him." So he needed that little extra bit to say he wanted to come. But once he got there, Jeff, he was totally engaged. So I kind of understand how this works.
So I tell people, as a swimmer, swimming around a back line, or what was worse, I remember in college doing 3,000 backstrokes for time at an outdoor pool, look at the clouds. All you could do is notice the pain and suffering on it. That's tedious and boring. However, most people don't realize that when it comes to exercise and sports, it's social. Did I say social? Like, because it's interactive, you're doing something that's more of interest with something that's tedious and boring. So on my own, since 1988, I've had 6 workout partners since that period of time, different people over those years. Rarely do I ever work out, but the point really is what I'm doing it with somebody. It makes it more engaging, and thus I'm more motivated to do it. It mitigates the boredom, because people with ADHD, they're boredom intolerant. Now that's a little bit of off kilter from what we're talking about in terms of executive functions, but the idea really is just using grit and willpower is not really a sustainable strategy when it comes to motivation.
Yeah. Well, what we're talking about is, I think everybody that deals with somebody with an ADHD brain or autism or anything, we understand all of this. What is important to do is try to teach the neurotypicals, that this is what is going on, instead of them thinking that somebody's not motivated, and to encourage the kindness, from neurotypicals for those that are not. So what happens if you have an ADHD child and you force them to do something that they're not motivated to do?
They're not going to do it.
Right.
But let's kind of go. I wanted to pause to have you talk about motivation, but let's talk about like the kind of getting to the kindness part kind of indirectly. So a neurotypical, I would describe there's an equilibrium between these two motivational forces. Okay. Because a person with ADHD has got the impairment, the executive function motivation is in disequilibrium. All right. Because of that impairment. So the question is, from an engineering perspective, because cognitive ergonomics from the inside out takes an engineering perspective, what do we do from an engineering perspective to restore this equilibrium? We have a couple options. One, willpower. Let's think about that. What you're doing with willpower is using your emotions as a means to amp up your emotions to endure the discomfort. In that situation, you're not bringing about equilibrium. You're bringing about more disequilibrium, because you're talking about a higher cost in order to do that. So that's not working in the right direction, which is why willpower is not an effective strategy. A second alternative would be rewards. Now, recently I was in DC. I'm on a steering committee with advising some lobbyists trying to affect public policy when it comes to ADHD. And I was at the Capitol. And it was interesting to me because I looked up the Capitol steps and I kind of imagined a person at the bottom that didn't have any legs, without a wheelchair or ramp. And imagining that person, how would they get up to the top of all that steps? I might provide an incremental reward every time they go to the next step and the next step and the next step and the next step. And through that reward system, they might find their way up the steps the first time. But the second time is probably going to require a higher level of reward. Like, this is so much energy, I'm not going to do it, which explains why often the reward system work for a period of time, but at some point in time they wear out because the level of the reward has to be amplified. And really, when you're rewarding somebody, all you're doing is amplifying their emotions again to sit in the discomfort of the pain. Mm-hmm. So I don't find that to be really very effective long term. Our next alternative is accommodations. Now, I'm going to pick on one because this gets a little bit complicated, but one of the more common accommodations for people with ADHD is to give them extra time, like on a test or even to get some work done. It's either extra time or adjusting of expectations. And what I argue is you're just really just giving them more time to suffer. If normally you're talking about 8 hours of work and you're giving them 10 hours, you're not relieving the impairment. You're giving them more time. You're taking the pressure off. But what you're doing is going from acute pain to chronic pain to burnout. Because again, if it's an 8-hour day and they're working 10 hours a day every day, it's exhausting them over a period of time. And that's more the current kind of mindset. Now, again, I'm being simple here. I could just for the simplicity of it. What I'm advocating for is what I call adaptive accommodations. These are things that provide systemic relief. Mm-hmm. And so my eyesight is impaired. My eyeglasses are an adaptive accommodation where they mitigate that impairment so that I can see. Now, in our last interview, I talked about my model and it revealed what I call the intangible accommodation axiom, which I'm going to explain this so we can understand what adaptive accommodations are. And it is an axiom is a truth that's built on truths. It goes like this. ADHD is an executive function impairment. We've already talked about that. Executive functions are a collection of mind tools used to solve problems. We talked about that. Problems are multifaceted and ambiguous. We talked about that. Planning, making decisions, managing time, they're all multifaceted and ambiguous. So that's why they have problems. But here's the turn. It's generally accepted that language was originally derived for one reason, to solve shared problems. Think about it. If we didn't have problems, language would have never had a reason to come about. Now we have it. We use it for other things. But if it's generally accepted that it was derived to solve shared problems, direct oral conversation would be the most basic form. I mean, I imagine I'm hungry. I've got to kill that. I'm waving at you guys. Get on the other side to help me corner. That's a form of communication. So if I'm right, direct oral communication is the most basic form. Mm-hmm. We've been using it for thousands of years. Neurotypicals use it. People with ADHD use it. The issue really is because of the impairment, those with ADHD, they need more direct oral conversations to problem solve. So what I'm trying to do is use this model to advocate to get this written in with Americans with Disabilities Act so that people with ADHD, when they're stuck, they can talk out loud with other people in order to resolve the problem. This is an adaptive accommodation. It's providing systemic relief, which let's take this back to what you guys are doing. When you're bringing youths in that are struggling with ADHD, you're getting them hooked up with experts, nutritionists, exercise people, etc. And they're having direct oral conversations to resolve these problems. That's providing the adaptive accommodations. We're not requiring them to suffer longer. So in effect, that's what kindness is all about. We're providing these services to these kids and kindness to recognize that difference. And the key is people with ADHD, if they can get adaptive accommodations, right, they can perform like everybody else. And so really what I'm advocating for, as I said earlier, I wish everybody looked at ADHD as an executive function and impairment. It's an intangible impairment, but I argue that accommodations are hidden in plain sight. Mm-hmm. Accommodations happen to be intangible, like direct oral conversation or something called cueing. There's some other, what I call toggling type things. So at the end of the day, the idea of understanding ADHD when it comes to motivation as a 2-force system, because of the impairment, there's extra effort and it swings the force that wins to the emotion, the impulsive side. But we can engineer this. If we provide adaptive accommodations, we can bring the stuff back into equilibrium and they're no longer as impulsive. And so often people with ADHD, they might have a hard time with clutter, but if they do it with somebody, they do it. Or they might be talking to somebody about a paper. They're talking about it and solving the problem. They're not distracted by other things because we've made it easier. And again, to bring this full circle, the reason why I was honored to come on and talk about this was it's a new way of looking at motivation. It really makes a lot of sense. And it really begins to explain what you guys are all about. Now, I would like to go even a step further, that you have problems in many facets of your life, in many domains, whether it be school, work, psychological, or social. Mm-hmm. If you're at school and you're having a problem, your go-to is to go to the teacher, a tutor, a special ed, to have a direct oral conversation. At work, you go to your boss, a mentor, a peer, direct oral conversation. Psychological problems, you go to a therapist, a ADHD coach, a direct oral conversation. Life coaching was actually originally founded because people didn't need therapists or stuff. They just were stuck in life. Life coaching is the Socratic method. It's asking questions to help people solve the problem. So there we have another tangible evidence of how direct oral conversation is the universal problem-solving accommodation. And if we can create an argument to provide this adaptive accommodation for these kids, it would be very helpful. And again, I'm bringing it all back to you guys, because effectively you're going out, you've collected a team of people to provide for these kids, to do this, to be kind to them, to help them with this motivational disequilibrium, to bring in impairment so that they can achieve what they're capable of.
Yeah, so true. Let me give an example, maybe that might help too. So Anthony had dysgraphia, okay? And the one accommodation that we worked to get for him was that for test taking, he would get taken out and he would get asked the questions, because if he just read them, he couldn't write them down. It just didn't go from here to paper.
Plus, he was way behind in his reading too. He hadn't got the reading accommodations that he had needed early on, so he was way behind.
But when you ask him the questions, he would get them all right because he knew the answers. So that conversation, that direct oral conversation with a teacher or
an aide or somebody,
was an accommodation. That was an adaptive accommodation for him, and he did great. The challenge was, though, is that he hated to get pulled out of class, because when he came back in, he was shamed. He was basically bullied, and people said he was stupid, and why are you going outside of class and stuff. So how do we get people? That's
first of all, I want to piggyback that. If you The Blind Side is a movie about Michael Orr. He was a left tackle, I think, of the Ravens. Go back and watch that. The teacher was just basically saying, the kid knows what's kind of going on if you quiz him on it. And so going back to where you are at the beginning, I talked about cognitive bias, tangibility bias, and systemic bias. These are three bias where people are looking at things the way they would like them to be, not the way they actually are. Cognitive ergonomics is a lens for us to begin to see the other side. The idea really is, if you've got somebody that's handicapped in a schoolroom, people don't make fun of somebody if they have to read in Braille or sign language or something like that, because it's all become tangible. What I'm hopeful is that things like this is going to help me get the word out there, so people will recognize it and bring tangibility, and that will be kind of mainstreamed in the classroom, and you'll no longer look as special, because again, we dismiss the abstract. We're trying to bring tangibility to executive function and impairment, so it's seen just like these other disabilities, so that then it comes back and it's adopted, it's mainstreamed, and no longer it's stigmatized. And when you think about it, there's an amazing amount of untapped assets in the minds of people with ADHD that aren't let out because they're spending so much time fighting with the impairment because they don't have the adaptive accommodations. If we can mainstream this and make it normal, so it's not seen as something strange, and we can mitigate that impairment, their natural strengths. And my sense is, I've never met your son, but he lives through you guys, and he had this smile that was adaptive. And sometimes people with ADHD, when they're passionate about something, people just they'll drop stuff and just following these people. And by allowing that happen, so much can be brought out of these talents that are not tapped. And so getting back to your question is, really, I'm trying to bring tangibility to this so that it's seen and adapted in the classroom and no longer something that's sent out. It might be, hey, it's just time for you to take the test orally, or hey, we're going to group up. If you need somebody that you just need to talk through it, you raise your hand and somebody else says, I'm happy to help you talk through that stuff. And so then it's as a benefit. And again, everything I'm talking about helps neurotypicals. It's just people with ADHD need more of it.
Yeah.
And I think too with people with, especially with young kids with ADHD, they get shamed so often when they're young. So the opportunity for that conversation becomes less and less and less because they're afraid to say something or ask something because they're afraid that they are going to be shamed. And if everybody could just understand that, you know, that they need the oral conversation and not to shame them, you know, I think it would make it easier for everybody.
Yep. And a lot of what you're doing is educating parents and educators, because people will sit there. I've had this question a lot. Like if you got a 15-year-old kid with ADHD, you have to remember their executive functions are behind in development. So you're really dealing with a 12-year-old.
Yep.
And the brain doesn't fully mature until 27, 28. And so one of the things that we've got to do is we've got to get this word out to the people in charge so that they're aware of it, so they can like, hey, I noticed that whenever you're talking through a problem, you seem to get a solution. Like whenever you're studying and talking out loud, you can begin to mirror that back to the kids in order for them to understand, oh, cause and effect, this works like this, whatever. But you've got to help kind of make those dots. And if your cognitive bias is like, no, they should be doing this on their own. Like recently, I've got somebody that went through my program and they got a report on one of the kids they were coaching. The teacher says, you need to work, you need more independent work. And the person's like, no, that teacher doesn't get it. It's not, they need more independent. They need more working with other people to solve the problem. Now you're shaming them because you're saying, I want you to go try harder with your impairment. All right. That's not very kind. Right.
No. Not kind.
That's actually kind of cruel when you think about it. Right. So, but honestly, I'm not trying to bash teachers. They're doing the best that they can with what they got. Just cognitive ergonomics is the first lens. I go back to that electricity analogy, right? It's the first time we've had those things to bring tangibility. So I'm kind of hoping that there's a new day for us and for you guys and what you're doing. I'm hoping this is bringing validity. I mean, logic to understand not just what you're doing from a research perspective, but this just makes sense.
It does make sense. Complete sense.
Absolutely.
So how do you get this mainstream? What's your steps to get this mainstream, Jeff?
So the problem with cognitive ergonomics is attention scope is it's a lens that you have to be specially trained on. So for example, a radiologist has got to go through special training to be able to read a CAT scan, an MRI, X-ray, ultrasound. So in order to understand how to use attention scope, you got to go through specialized training. And I'm having to train the people right now. So I've got classes going. I'm training people. Ultimately, I got to get to the point of training the trainer. And I've got a couple TAs that are coming in behind me. So the more this gets out there and grows, because this is a new field of engineering, I can't own it. This is really for the world. Cognitive ergonomics is a training program. It's an observational training program that I'm training people to be able to see what I'm describing. And the more I can get the word out and the more people that can take my program, then I can begin to scale this. Right now, it's not as scalable with me because I have to do it. And my hope is that at some level, this will become mainstream around the world and that we'll be providing these type of accommodations. And hopefully, I've got some people coming. I've already trained psychologists and therapists and a couple doctors and stuff and a bunch of other coaches. And it's really kind of helped opening their eyes substantially. So it's in the early stages, but I'm in that growth stage right now by just getting the word out. And, a lot of people are bought into the current behavioral interventions. And I kind of understand that. But if you really look at things through the lens of cognitive ergonomics, it explains a lot of anomalies that the current interventions can't really explain, which goes back to the direct oral conversations. And it goes back to a lot of things that you're doing. It's kind of cracks me up. They've got to do research to prove what you guys are doing and work. And I go, it's direct oral conversation. As long as it's goal oriented and as long as you're not shaming the kid, it's fundamental. Right. It goes back since language was invented. It's like, I got to prove like the sun comes up. But anyway.
Right.
I mean, anybody that's had an ADHD child or that has ADHD, I mean, you don't need to research that because you're living it on a daily basis.
So I have one question for you. So the challenge that we see with kids is the impulsiveness, Jeff. So you highlighted something around impulsiveness early in the conversation.
Yeah.
Help
So
us with
yeah,
that.
that goes right back to the disequilibrium. So your urges are based off of either seeking pleasure, escaping discomfort.
Right.
Right. So like if you change positions in bed at night, you're doing that to escape the discomfort of your other positions, or if you scratch yourself, etc. When you take a look at, that's really what an urge is. And when you think about it, an urge is urgent. It's now, it's intense. And there's a very strong desire to escape discomfort.
Yeah.
Impulsivity is a strong urge to escape the discomfort of right now. Right. So people with ADHD, they're boredom intolerant. And when you're asking them to do something that requires their executive function, a lot of cognitive effort, it's physically uncomfortable for them. So what we see as impulsivity is magnified substantially because of the discomfort we're putting them in. So what most people see is a focus problem, and I'm arguing that it is, but the epicenter is if I give you something difficult to do, you'll have an impulse. So for example, I'm going to walk through this. I've often picked people like Cassie. Can you calculate 3 to the power of 5? That's an exponent, right? 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. And I'll give people that and they'll go, oh, I suck at math. And sometimes they don't even engage in trying to solve the problem, or they start go 3 times 3 is 9 times 3. Never mind. And what I try to illustrate in that, and this is kind of a part of attention scope, is when I gave them that cognitive thing to do it inside their head, you've got to keep track of the calculations. 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27, times 3. But then you got to remember, well, how many times have I multiplied it times 3? So that's where you're using your executive functions. And the I suck at math or the giving up, that's the impulsive reaction. That's the emotional reaction to escape and give up what you're trying to do. So the idea with adaptive accommodations is if we're making it systemically easier, there's less of an emotional urge to escape that discomfort. So at the end of the day, if we made it easy for you to solve the problem, then you wouldn't want to act out or do anything else so bad. You'd sit there and do it longer. That goes back into what I'm calling for the adaptive accommodations over the compensatory accommodations. There's still some impulsivity that's there associated with intolerance from boredom. But at the end of the day, this always goes back to just really bringing in that balance between those two forces so that there's less of an urge for them to escape.
So again, what we want them to do is to talk. We want them to collaborate, right? We want them to talk to somebody.
That's when it comes to solving problems.
Yeah.
When it comes to solving problems, yes. Again, like and things that are tedious and boring is sometimes doing the company of something else to relieve the boredom. But I'm generalizing the talking part, but it really comes down to the difference between in-mind thinking and out-of-mind thinking. There's a lot of other subtleties. I chew up a lot of time if I went into what toggling is and what queuing is. Toggling is really, we're using a lot of technology these days, and kids are having to hold information on one screen while they toggle or scroll to another. That's a working memory nightmare. It's an executive functioning nightmare. A lot of times in schools, there's no printers around and kids are being forced into smaller screens. Cognitive ergonomics makes an argument for printing the stuff out for a lot of other reasons. So I'm using direct oral conversation, but it's really about really advocating for helping these people solve problems out of mind and not having to go home and do it all by themselves. Like I tell people, when the pandemic hit, I thought I was going to be out of a job, but my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Why? Because everybody was sent home from school and work where they were having direct oral conversations all by themselves. It wasn't a motivation problem or a productivity problem. It's just the accommodation was built into the environment and they lost it. It's like all of a sudden I'm trying to read without my glasses. It's not a productivity or motivation problem. I just lost my accommodation.
Yeah.
So Jeff, impulsiveness though, so is it always going towards something more pleasurable, the impulse?
Escaping discomfort or seeking pleasure. So like one of the things I talk about usually when you're dealing with kids, they're escaping the discomfort, if you will. But even if, let's say, you have a teenager that you're having a conversation with, and all of a sudden, you got to remember they're going through puberty, right? And forgive the vulgarity of what I'm going to say, but if he's in heat over some girl, um, it's pretty difficult in those situations because we might provide all the adaptive accommodations, but he's going to, I remember I was a high adventure scoutmaster, and I used to talk about, you got to get to they got to get to Eagle Scout or be darn close before perfume and petroleum hits, because when that hits, you're competing with forces that are just really, really strong based off of the whole puberty cycle.
Right.
So we have to factor that stuff in. But as a general rule, the message today is people with ADHD, they are very, very motivated, but you're not recognizing the impairment, and that you need to be kind to these people, and let's provide adaptive accommodations for them so that we can mitigate that impairment so that their natural gifts come out and they can achieve what they're capable of, which goes right back to what you guys are doing, because you're providing the resources for the adaptive accommodations. And we're really just saying, just be kind to these people. They're very talented, and you're just trying to raise money and awareness, and you're saving lives while you're doing it along the way.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining it the way that you did, because we started this from our own experience, with things that we wish that we had when Anthony was growing up with ADHD. But we really appreciate the way that you have tied it to the adaptiveness, because that's not something that we didn't sit down and say, oh, we need to come up with something, that's more adaptive or.
No.
Well, let's think about this. Like, by the way, ADHD is almost hereditary as height, Tony. Anyway, take a look at what you guys are doing. And you got together a board very quickly, and Cassie's there in collaboration with you every step of the way. When you think about it, you've surrounded yourself with direct oral conversations like every step of the way. You've built that environment. And, when I'm working with people like adults, I'm like, we have to build your board of directors. It's not official, but it's kind of like an unofficial type thing. And take a look at where you guys are, where you started, and the amount of direct oral conversation that you've had to problem solve every step of the way. Whether you have ADHD or not, I mean, you guys, you're really a model of it. And when I first met you and you were talking about this, I've talked to a lot of people, had a lot of really good ideas, but you've surrounded yourself with more people, and plus you're a little bit more stubborn than most people. And I say that with all the love.
No.
But look at what you guys have been able to accomplish, and it hasn't been without a lot of pain. I've seen it in your eyes along the way, right? But you've been there along the way and provided that type of stuff, and you guys, you're not thriving yet, right? But you guys are getting there.
That's right. Yeah, and this fits perfectly in. The whole concept around kindness fits into we want to raise kindness to a whole new level. Choosing kindness for kids that have ADHD is so important. If you just step back and think about what we're trying to get at, Anthony was naturally kind. Mm-hmm. We want to bring that. We want to keep his spirit alive in the kindness way, because he watched over people. People came to him because of his kindness, because of how he, and it replicates. It can really help, and will help one person, and they help one person, and it just continues to grow. And that's where we're going. In 2026 will be a big year for us, Jeff, because we want to take this kindness model to a whole nother level.
Yep.
And so with your support and with others, I think we can make a lot of progress and help a lot of kids and families. So we thank you so much for what you do and for your message and the way you communicate your message. It's just, it's powerful. And, love having you with us. And, as you continue down the path, let's continue to stay close together, because
absolutely. Thanks for what you do. The community's, you guys are a great community asset and advocates. So thanks for all that time and effort you put into it.
Thank you.
Well, you were a great catapult for us, because I think right off the bat you did the interview you did the podcast with us, and then you
article.
You were instrumental in getting that article published for us in the CHAD magazine, Attention magazine. So we really do owe you a lot of gratitude for listening and for understanding and for being able to help us and
for seeing that we were a little stubborn,
and for knowing that Tony is very persistent.
We'll get there. But hey, thank you, Jeff, for today. And this really brings us to the end. This is a powerful conversation, and it was, huge thanks to you, Jeff, for your guidance, your wisdom, and all that you do. And if you found this session helpful, this episode helpful, please subscribe. The more people that subscribe, the more messages that are going to get out there, and the more YouTube and all the podcast channels will take us on. We're on an ADHD journey. We're on a journey to help as many kids as we can. Mm-hmm. And the more we spread that information, the better we're going to be. So we like to end each session with our motto. And this is a motto that we live with for 30 plus years now. Today is the best day of your life.
And tomorrow will be even better.
And life is better with you. We want that message to put it on your fridge, put it everywhere you can, because telling your kids that life is better with them is so important. So listen, thank you, everybody. Jeff, thank you.
Yes, everybody check out Jeff's socials and his podcast and all the things that he's doing, because he's got a lot of great information.
And we'll put all that down below in the comments section. So
yep.
Jeff, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
You're welcome.
Be
good.
Thank you for spending time with us today.
If you liked today's episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who could use the information. And remember, a little bit of kindness goes a long way, especially for those kids with ADHD. See you next time.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to our podcasts. We really appreciate you listening to them. And hopefully you're gaining a lot from the information that we share. Now we're here to ask you to help us. Help us to help these kids. Your donation is an investment in helping a child with ADHD and helping a family that can't afford the cost of care. Our QR codes are below. Every dollar we raise goes directly into helping these kids to thrive, and we get them the help they need, specifically the care from our care model that they need. So we hope you'll make a donation, become part of our community and donation community. You'll get newsletters and updates periodically, and we'd love to have you part of it. So thank you very much, and appreciate your consideration and your time. Best.